He tossed his latte in the trash and said, "No wonder you never made manager. You didn't even go to college." Name's Ray, 58. Forklift guy turned small-time investor. Until that Tuesday in the break room under flickering fluorescent lights holding my old company badge like a paperweight. Ever been underestimated by your own kid? The envelope showed up on a Tuesday. It was plain white, no return address, just my father's name in those stiff, all-capital letters that looked more like stamps than handwriting. It sat alone in my mailbox, wedged between a Tractor Supply coupon book and a flyer for the church's annual pie drive. I stood there a while, not opening it, not yet. The air smelled like pine mulch and something faintly metallic. The wind had that edge to it, pre-winter sharpness, like a knife you'd forgotten was still in the drawer. Back inside, I set the envelope on the kitchen table and boiled some water for tea. I probably wouldn't finish. The kettle hissed while I watched the paper, studied the curve of the flap, like it might tell me something about its contents. The seal was tight. No tearing at the corners. He'd been deliberate. Even before I slid it open, I knew what it was. The smell gave it away, a faint trace of mothballs and lemon oil, the same scent that lingered in the drawer of his desk since forever. That drawer had held everything from old sermon notes to tax forms to, at one point, a revolver we weren't supposed to know about. He'd always treated documents like artifacts. Meaningful. Unforgiving. I opened it with a steak knife because the letter opener Mom used was still in her sewing kit, and I hadn't had the heart to rummage through it since she passed. Inside, a single typed page, thick parchment stock, the kind you don't buy unless you're trying to make a point. Ellis, it began. No dear, no warmth. Just the name I'd been given and had carried like a burden. "I trust this finds you well," the letter read. "With the matter of the estate becoming increasingly pertinent, I request you reconsider your position regarding the family's structure of inheritance." My mouth dried at the words. He hadn't asked how I was, hadn't even mentioned Mom, though the timing stung the week of Thanksgiving, our first. Without her roasted pecan dressing, without her humming in the kitchen off-key, but consistent like the beat of a heart, you didn't notice until it was gone. Then came the postscript, all caps bolded. "If you decline again, don't expect a chair at the table." I read it twice, though I didn't need to. The threat was unmistakable. Not just a rejection, but an erasure. It wasn't new, not really. My father had always believed in lines who crossed them and who stayed put. I'd wandered too far for his liking. I folded the letter precisely in thirds like the way it came, then unfolded it again. My fingers hesitated over the crease before setting it down. From the desk drawer beside my bed, I retrieved something I hadn't touched in over 4 years, Mom's old savings book. Soft green cover with embossed clovers barely larger than my palm. I remembered her fingers, how she'd pressed them against the pages after recording each deposit, like she was patting a child to sleep. She'd kept it hidden from him, tucked under old quilting magazines and expired coupons. Not for deceit, but for dignity. That book wasn't about money. It was about having something of her own. I opened it. The last entry was dated June 2017, a month before she died. $42, 37 ounces. In blue ink, the kind she liked, with a small smiley face drawn beside it. A lump caught in my throat. That little smile so out of place in a ledger. I didn't cry. I haven't in years, not even when we buried her. But my hand trembled a bit as I touched the page. Maybe from the cold, maybe from something else. Outside, the wind had picked up scattering pecan leaves across the gravel driveway. I grabbed the metal coffee tin I used for burning junk mail and stepped onto the back porch. The paper curled quick when the flame hit. Not dramatic, just brittle. The kind of burn you watch without blinking. I held it with tongs Mom's old ones from her turkey prep box. The lettering blackened first, then vanished. I let it all go until there was only smoke, and then I tipped the ashes out onto the damp ground. One stubborn corner of the envelope remained smoldering. I stepped on it with the heel of my boot. Afterward, I sat on the porch steps a while listening to the rustling trees and the faint chime of wind bells from the neighbor's yard. I sipped what was left of the tea. Lukewarm now. Bitter. I should have left it there. Walked away. Let Thanksgiving come and go like any other lonely holiday. But something in me shifted. Maybe it was the book. Maybe it was the postscript. Maybe it was just time. I walked back inside and pulled my phone from the kitchen drawer where I kept it most days, silenced and forgotten. I tapped out a reply to Joella. I'll go just once more. But I'm not signing anything. Didn't think you had it in you to come back, Harlan said as soon as I stepped onto the front porch. The door was already open, like he'd been watching for me. I gave a dry nod, no handshake, no embrace. His shoulders filled the doorway, the way old trees block a forest path solid, unmoved by time or sentiment. His shirt was ironed to a stiffness only he could tolerate, tucked into slacks with creases sharp enough to cut. Inside, the air was thick with roasted yam star anise and something faintly musty, like the dining room hadn't been aired out since Easter. The chandelier flickered slightly above us, casting a yellow haze over the long table set for 5, though there were only 4 chairs. I noticed it right away, the old casserole dish. Mom's. Pale blue with one chipped corner she used to cover with her thumb like a secret. It sat at the far end full of untouched green bean casserole steam long gone. No one had dared move it. Joella looked up from folding napkins into nervous origami. A faint smile, then back to work, her hands shaping a swan, then unshaping it again. The linen bore the initials W.R. stitched in gold. Winna Ruth. I swallowed. Reverend Cormac sat beside her, already halfway through a buttered roll. He nodded at me like I was a late arrival to a memorial service, eyes solemn, palms dry and still on the table. His presence wasn't surprising. Harlan always invited someone to anchor the power dynamics. Let's eat, Harlan said, gesturing stiffly. The Lord waits for no man's appetite. We bowed our heads for grace. Harlan spoke in that slow, deliberate cadence he used in his old county meetings. Lord, we thank you for your bounty, for family even when fractured, for legacy even when doubted, for continuity through your will and ours. The pause at ours stung sharper than the dry chill creeping in through the drafty window behind me. The meal began like a performance. Turkey passed clockwise. Joella took half a spoonful of stuffing and nothing more. Cormac filled his plate without shame. Harlan talked about weatherproofing the shed and checking the waterline before first frost. I nodded along, chewing more than I needed, less for hunger and more to fill silence. I hadn't touched the casserole. No one had. About halfway through, as Joella poured herself a quarter glass of wine, Harlan reached into the sideboard. From beneath a folded linen runner, he pulled out a cream-colored manila folder. I saw it coming like a slow-motion crash. He slid it under the bowl of cranberry sauce like it was a polite menu suggestion. No ceremony, no explanation. Give that a glance when you have a moment, he said, eyes still fixed on his plate. I didn't reach for it. I let it sit there, the red juice from the bowl slowly creeping across the bottom corner. A drop of gravy had already found its way to the top, blurring the bold letters of what I assumed was the new estate draft. Joella froze mid-sip. Cormac gave a small approving nod, like someone had quoted scripture accurately. The sound in the room dulled to the clinks of silverware and the occasional throat clear. It was always like this, quiet, stiff, everyone pretending this was normal. A holiday scripted by some bitter playwright who mistook inheritance for affection. I reached for the folder. My hand brushed the warm ceramic of the casserole dish, empty still. I opened the flap, pulled out the top document. It was notarized in red ink, already signed in 2 places. My name printed in bold, top center. Below it, modification of designated beneficiaries and transfer provisions. Really, I said, holding the page in both hands. We're doing this over turkey. Harlan didn't blink. It's now or never. I glanced around. Joella wouldn't meet my eye. Her napkin was now a crumpled rope in her hand. She twisted it once, then let it go. Outside, I could hear the faint rustle of leaves, pecan and sweet gum, the last holdouts of fall. The house felt colder than it should have. Or maybe it was just the way he orchestrated warmth, conditional weighted. I refolded the paper without reading the rest. The ink from the cranberry had bled into the signature line. My appetite vanished like the steam from Mom's dish. I said nothing. Not yet. But I knew I'd have to answer either now or soon. Calvin Dias doesn't talk to many folks these days, the waitress said low, like she was revealing a haunted name. She poured my refill with a steady hand, but her eyes flicked toward the back booth. Used to be sharp as a tack. Now only comes in Tuesdays and Thursdays, orders rye toast and black coffee. That's it. I nodded, though I hadn't asked. In small towns like Dover, information was currency, and Maylene had always been rich in gossip and short on tact. I stirred the watery coffee, slowly watching the creamer cloud dissolve. Donnie's Diner hadn't changed since the 90s. Probably hadn't changed since it opened in '54. Red leather booths patched with duct tape, a jukebox that hadn't worked since Y2K, and floor tiles the color of boiled eggshells, chipped and curling at the edges. It smelled like bacon grease and lemon cleaner, a scent that hung in the vents year-round. I slid into the booth where Calvin already sat, arms folded across his chest, like he'd been waiting for this conversation longer than I'd been alive. "Ellis," he said, not smiling. "You got older. So did you." He grunted. "Difference is, I earned it slow. You look like someone aged you overnight." I didn't laugh. Calvin was blunt like that always had been. He had a kind of moral gravity, the kind of man who still folded his newspaper and said, "Ma'am," even when no one expected it. "Appreciate you meeting me," I said, eyes skimming the table. The surface was worn smooth except where someone had carved initials into the grain, W.R. I ran a thumb over the faded grooves. Winna Ruth and Harlan Bramlett. I felt my stomach turn. "Your mom loved this booth," Calvin murmured. "Sat right there every other Sunday. We used to plan the reading drives for the county libraries. She always got buttermilk pie. Said it was better than church." "She talked about those drives," I said quietly. "Even when she was sick." Calvin nodded, then took a careful sip of his coffee. "You want to talk about the estate?" "I want to talk about the truth," I said. He leaned back, cracked a knuckle absent-mindedly. "Harlan's got one idea of truth: keep the land in the bloodline no matter the cost. Started talking about dilution of legacy after your mom died. Got worse each year." I swallowed. He said she agreed with the changes. "That's a lie," Calvin said. "Winna had her own plans. Private ones. She never trusted the courts much. Or Harlan. But she trusted documentation." He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a folded slip of thin thermal paper, the kind that fades fast under sunlight. The top was barely legible Fulton Community Credit Union, then a series of numbers, and beneath that, the line transfer to E. March, $5,000. The date stamped near the corner, April 13th, 2017. My throat tightened. Who's Elijah March? Calvin raised an eyebrow. I was hoping you'd know. That transfer was the last one she made before she went into the hospital. It didn't come from the joint account. This was her private fund, the same one she used to run those workshops, buy books, pay for kids' lunches at the elementary school. She didn't tell me about this, I said, barely hearing myself. Not once. Maybe she meant to, he said. Maybe Harlan made sure she couldn't. You ever notice how quiet the house got near the end? Like even the wind didn't want to stir the curtains. I looked down at the receipt again. The ink bled at one edge, a faint purple halo forming where a coffee ring had soaked through. I imagined Mom slipping it into an envelope, sealing it with one of those old stickers she used on our lunch bags, cartoon apples or smiling suns. She always carried her savings book in that canvas tote, I muttered. Never let anyone touch it. Exactly, Calvin said. That ledger was hers. Not Harlan's. Not the estate lawyer's. Hers. If she moved money, there was a reason. The waitress dropped off a plate of rye toast. Calvin ignored it. I asked, you think Elijah March was part of her plan? I think Elijah March was someone she trusted, he said. Maybe to protect something. Maybe someone. That's where you start looking. I felt the crack forming beneath everything, like the earth was suddenly softer, less sure. The house I'd grown up in, the inheritance, Harlan was hell-bent on controlling the quiet loyalty I'd assumed my mother had. It all blurred. Calvin folded the receipt again and pushed it toward me. Careful with that. Paper like this doesn't live long. I tucked it into my jacket's inner pocket, right against the lining. Outside, rain began to mist the windows, turning the world beyond into watercolor smears. I looked out and saw my reflection, a man older than he felt, holding onto clues like driftwood. Calvin stood up slowly. You want answers? Ellis, start where your mother left off. Find Elijah March. He paused, pulled his scarf tighter. And don't bring that folder Harlan gave you. That thing's poison. I nodded, still sitting, hands around my mug. Behind me, the initials in the wood caught a sliver of light from the window. WR plus HB. Maybe once it meant love. Now it felt like a warning. My father slammed the drawer so hard, the utensils inside leapt with a metallic clatter, scattering like mice startled by a barn cat. One spoon skittered across the floor, spinning to a stop near the baseboard heater. Neither of us moved to pick it up. Rain lashed against the kitchen windows in sheets hitting sideways like it had the night she passed. I remembered that storm clearly, December 9th, 4 years ago. The hospice nurse had left early. Joella was on a plane. I sat in this very kitchen stirring cold soup as thunder cracked, and Mom whispered that she didn't want to die in silence. Now the only sound was the refrigerator's hum and my father's breathing, short, shallow puffs through flared nostrils. You're digging up ghosts, Ellis, he said, not looking at me. And you're not good at it. I unfolded the faded receipt and placed it carefully on the table. She transferred $5,000 to Elijah March. April 2017, from her private account. Calvin remembered. Harlan's jaw tightened, but his eyes flickered just for a second. I'd seen that flicker before, back when I was 12 and found cigarette burns on the garage workbench. He'd blamed the neighbor kid, but couldn't look me in the eye when he said it. I don't know anything about that, he said flatly. I leaned in, voice low. Then let me see the ledgers. They're private. They're hers. He turned his back to me, opened the drawer again, this time slower. He pulled out a crumpled dish towel and dried his hands though they weren't wet. His fingers worked the fabric like he was twisting answers from it. She kept a notebook I pressed. A green one. Embossed clovers. You know the one. Silence. Only the wind now and the faint whistle from the old gap under the door. I need to see it, I said. Not for me. For her. He turned then eyes like flint. You don't get to invoke her, not after all this time. You left. You buried your head in numbers and paperwork and forgot what mattered. I stood up. I forgot what mattered. You're the one using cranberry sauce to hand out ultimatums. You're the one rewriting her legacy to fit your narrative. Sit down, he barked. No. His hand darted forward faster than I expected at 77. He grabbed the lapel of my coat, the one hanging on the chair, and yanked. Something thin slid from the inside pocket. The savings book hit the floor with a soft slap. Harlan bent quickly, snatched it up, and flipped it open. You've been holding this, he growled. It was in her things, I said. I didn't hide it. I just waited. He turned a page too fast. The paper gave way. A brittle corner tore a triangle of soft green paper still caught between his fingers. We both froze. He looked down at the damage like it was blood on his hands. I saw his shoulders stiffen, and for a second I thought he might apologize. Instead, he closed the book, without a word walked to the far end of the kitchen and placed it on the counter. Joella's footsteps creaked across the hall, then paused at the doorway. Her eyes scanned the room, the spoon on the floor, the torn paper, our postures. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. She turned and walked away, her silence louder than a scream. I picked up the book, now missing its bottom right corner on page 17. A list of transactions ended mid-line where the ink had begun to fade, and the rip had swallowed a name I'd never get back. You're not protecting Mom's legacy, I said, voice hoarse. You're hoarding it. He didn't turn around. The screen door creaked as he stepped onto the back porch, letting the cold wind snake through the room. The door slammed behind him. Rain kept hammering the windows. I stayed standing. The coffee cup, half full, trembled from the vibrations. I steadied it before it tipped. Then I sat slowly and placed the savings book in front of me like a relic from a broken shrine. The tear was small, barely the size of a matchbook, but it felt catastrophic. She deserved better, I whispered, my fingers tracing the embossed clover leaves. The kitchen smelled like burnt toast and betrayal. I found her draft will, Calvin said, tapping a yellowed folder with fingers that trembled slightly, as if even paper from the past could carry static. I hadn't sat down yet. Just hearing the words made my knees stiffen. His office smelled of lemon polish and dust, like a library no one dared rearrange. Shelves leaned under the weight of legal volumes, and frames of his community work were hung slightly askew. There was one with Mom in it, Winna Ruth standing beside Calvin, with a third grader clutching a phonics workbook. She wore that cardigan with the applique sparrow on the sleeve. I looked away before it undid me. Calvin nudged the folder closer. I had to dig through my off-site storage. She never signed it, but she drafted it 1 week before the hospital. I opened the flap and paused. The cover page was dated December 5th, 2017, just days before everything had gone dark. The typewritten words were formal, mechanical, but then there were the annotations. Her penmanship was still graceful, if slightly slanted with age. She'd written in blue ink to Ellis, "You were always enough. This is not punishment, it is purpose." My breath stilled. She had named Elijah March, a student from her Sunday literacy class. a 20-something man with no known family working nights at a warehouse and coming to church half awake to learn how to sign his name better. The second page was a clause outlining her desire to endow growth, not just preserve legacy. She'd earmarked half the land, not the house, not the bank assets, but the land for Elijah. He reminded her of someone, Calvin said gently. She never told me who. Maybe you. The room felt like it had sunk a few inches into the earth. She told you this, she hinted. Winna had a way of hiding truth inside gentle stories. There was more. A check photocopied dated the same week. $12,000 made out to Elijah March. In the memo line, private gift. Book's life. A small clover sticker sealed the stub green and shiny, like the one on her old savings book. Did she ever say why? I asked, tracing the signature, Winna Ruth Bramlett, shaky but steady. There was a smudge near the M in March, as if she'd paused to correct herself mid-stroke. Calvin didn't answer directly. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling like something had finally broken loose inside him. She said love without action was just sentiment. She believed you'd understand someday. I didn't know what to say. My fists curled on the arms of the chair. That same ache returned sharp and hollow just beneath my ribs. This wasn't about money. It never was. This was about memory, about who gets remembered, about what we choose to bury. You're telling me my father saw this? I asked. Calvin nodded. I gave him a copy. He said she was confused, that it wasn't legally binding. But morally, Calvin leaned forward, voice low. Morally, it's the only will that matters. I looked down at the folder. My mother's handwriting stared back unshaken in intent, if not in ink. I pulled the torn savings book from my coat pocket. It was frayed now, a small tear at the corner. I placed it beside the draft will. 2 relics. 2 pieces of her. Outside, wind stirred dry leaves along the porch rail. I could almost hear her again, humming as she folded laundry, humming when she was nervous. I thought I knew her. But maybe knowing someone isn't about collecting facts. Maybe it's about honoring what they tried to do when no one was looking. She didn't need a courtroom to be clear, I said. Calvin nodded slowly, his eyes damp. No, she didn't. I stood the folder under my arm. There was one more name to say out loud, one thread left to pull. Where do I find him? Elijah Calvin asked. I nodded. He reached into the drawer and pulled out a Post-it scribbled an address. Start there. It's a trailer lot near Atkins. He still teaches GED classes, far as I know. As I stepped outside, the air bit colder than it should have. I zipped my coat halfway folder tucked close to my ribs. The sky was low and gray, the kind that felt heavy even before the rain came. She trusted him. That's where I'll start. You want to drag this family through mud for a stranger? My father hissed under the old barn's tin roof, the rain hammering above like a warning drum. The air smelled of hay rot and rusted tools, sharp and familiar. I could barely feel my fingers from the cold, but my voice held steady. It's not mud, I said. It's truth. The barn hadn't changed much since I was a boy. Same cracked beams, same oil stains on the floor. But that night, it felt smaller, like the walls were closing in, like memory itself was tightening around us. Harlan stood by the old grain chest jaw, tight eyes darting to the envelope in my hand. Joella was nearby, barely a shadow against the back wall, her arms crossed, head down. She hadn't spoken since we arrived. Not when I told her I needed to show something. Not even when I asked her to come. I pulled out the draft will folded once and the copy of the check Mom wrote to Elijah March. I held them like offerings. Harlan flinched at the sight, as if the paper itself could burn him. "This was her handwriting," I said. "You knew, you buried it." He snatched the pages from me with a bark of a laugh. "Forged. You probably paid someone to draft this trash. People don't just give away half their estate to charity cases." "You mean like Mom did?" I asked quietly. Joella made a sound then. Something small and sharp like glass cracking in her throat. Her eyes were rimmed with tears she hadn't yet let fall. "She told me too," she whispered. "Back when she started getting sick. Said she wanted someone to use the land, really use it, not just hoard it." Harlan turned to her so fast the air shifted. "And you didn't say anything?" "I was afraid," she said. "Still am." He stepped back, stunned. For once his voice failed him. I reached into my coat pocket and took out Mom's old savings book, the soft green cover, the embossed clovers now faded and bent. The tear from our last fight still cut through one corner. Slowly, I peeled a strip of archival tape and mended it, smoothing it down with my thumb. It wasn't perfect, but it held. "I'm not doing this to embarrass you," I said. "And it's not about revenge. I'm doing this because she was the only person in this house who never lied to me." Harlan gritted his teeth. "She was sentimental, that's all. You think she understood taxes' seeds. She understood what it meant to leave the world better than she found it." The words came out like a stone laid on sacred ground. Silence fell. Outside, the wind pushed against the barn doors, creaking them inward. Joella stepped forward, her fingers shaking as she reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out a weathered envelope with curled edges and a faint, almost invisible wax seal. "I found this in Mom's old jewelry box," she said, "hidden under the velvet tray. It just says, for E.M." I took it from her carefully. The paper was soft, worn thin at the edges, and smelled faintly of her perfume, rose and starch, and something like memory. "She meant for him to have it," Joella said, eyes fixed on the envelope. "She just never got the chance." I looked at Harlan. His face was pale now, not angry, but hollow, as if something inside had finally given way. "Before New Year's," I said. "I'm transferring the land. I've already talked to a lawyer." His mouth opened, but no sound came. "I'm done waiting for your permission." Joella reached for my hand, but didn't speak. Her grip was warm grounding. Above us, the rain softened for a moment, tapping lightly like a heartbeat through the rafters. Mom's portrait still hung in the main house. I hadn't dared look at it in days, but I saw her now in the tilt of Joella's chin, the tremor in my own hands, the quiet certainty of the envelope. It ends here. Not the memory, not the legacy. The silence. And that was enough. The check was dated December 29th. My name in the top left corner. Elijah Marches in the line below. The signature mine was steady. The countersignature his wavered as though he'd gripped the pen too hard or not at all. But it was there, real and irreversible. A fete cornema, I stood outside the Bramlett First Baptist Church collar turned up against the wind that carried a memory of my mother's voice humming a hymn she never quite finished. Joella hadn't said she would come, but I spotted her standing near the maple tree beside the choir's entrance, arms crossed, eyes down. She gave a faint nod when our eyes met, then looked away. Inside the church was warmer than I remembered. Old brass fixtures, wooden pews rubbed smooth by decades of elbows and doubt. Reverend Cormac, bless his aged form, still gave his homilies like a man shouting over thunder. But today he simply introduced the choir, stepped back, and let their voices take the room. They sang, "Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing," the hymn Mama always hummed when cooking biscuits on Sunday. I sat in the last pew, coat still on, hands folded so tight, I nearly missed the start of the second verse. The sopranos lifted first, then the tenors and altos joined until the melody filled the air with something close to forgiveness. From the corner of my eye, I saw Calvin slip in. He took a seat across the aisle and didn't look my way. He didn't have to. His presence alone was enough. He'd helped me draft the transfer letter, coordinate the fund setup, even dig up old Clover motifs from Mama's savings book to use on the new library wing signage. The fund bore her name, the Winna Ruth Bramlett Literacy Trust, run by Elijah March, designed for those the world forgets. Elijah hadn't wanted to speak at the service. "This isn't about me," he said on the phone. But when he arrived wearing a plain gray suit and scuffed shoes, he carried a file folder with everything Mama had written him, sticky notes, clover seals, a short poem in her hand about light in unexpected places. In the front pew, after the choir sat, he stood, cleared his throat, said, "She saw me." Just that. No explanation. No list of credentials. Just the truth that mattered most. Later that week, I stood outside the town library now with a brand new wing built from old intentions. The sign above the door read, "The Winna Ruth Learning Room," the letters carved in soft oak sunlight, catching each one like a slow blessing. Elijah cut the ribbon with gold-handled scissors. A small group clapped politely. I noticed Joella in the back holding a paper program and wiping one eye with her sleeve. Back home, I sat by the small grave where we'd buried Mama 4 winters ago. The wind had stripped the oak trees bare, and the last marigolds had browned at the stem. I read Elijah's email aloud, his thank you note sent just after depositing the check. Subject, "She saw me. I didn't have a mother like yours, but she saved me anyway. Thank you for choosing what she would have chosen." My throat closed. Not from grief exactly. From the strange ache that comes with being understood too late. I ran my hand over the sealed envelope in my coat pocket, the one Joella had found labeled for EM inside Mama's old jewelry box. It smelled faintly of her perfume, the kind that came in the green glass bottle with the chipped stopper. I hadn't opened it yet. I didn't need to. The act of passing it on was enough. When I reached the truck, a yellow sticky note clung to the windshield, wet at one corner from the morning dew. Joella's handwriting was unmistakable. "Thank you for doing what I couldn't." I folded the note, placed it inside Mama's savings book, the torn corner now taped with yellow archival tape, and tucked it back in the drawer where it belonged. Some stories don't end. They settle. Like dust on hymnals, like initials carved in old diner booths, like the echo of a woman's voice humming quietly in the corners of your memory, reminding you what grace actually sounds like. In the backyard, the old lemon tree finally bore fruit again. I hadn't even noticed at first. The blossoms had come and gone, and I'd kept telling myself it was done for just a piece of the past, holding on out of habit. But that morning the sun cracked through the clouds like a quiet promise, and there they were, 3 yellow fruits hanging from the highest branch, like it had never skipped a season at all. I leaned against the rake, stared a moment, and smiled. The ground was soft from the overnight rain, and next to the base of the tree, I'd already dug a shallow square of soil. A new sapling waited nearby, one Elijah had brought last week, roots bundled in burlap, and a small tag tied to its stem that read, "Meyer Lemon Hardy Zone 710. I didn't know if it'd take, but I was planting it anyway. Some things needed a second chance, even if no one promised they'd bloom. The guest house garden had changed. Where weeds once ruled, now herbs lined the walkway and tomato seedlings pressed up against the lattice fencing like curious children. I'd repainted the porch in soft green, not quite the color of Mom's savings book, but close enough to make me think of it. and just beside the back steps, under a shaded patch near the siding, I'd installed a small brass plaque. Winna's words, literacy for all. Elijah had come by later that morning. His pickup pulled into the gravel path slow and careful, and he waved through the windshield like someone arriving at a cousin's place, not a former stranger whose name once lived only on a buried check. I brought something, he said, holding up a faded manila envelope. Typed out her recipes. She handwrote some edits in the margins. I figured we could use them for the workshop. Inside were pages of cornbread instructions. Ginger snap tips and little notes like use buttermilk, not skim, it matters in my mother's cursive. I ran my fingers over the ink. It felt like holding her voice. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where years ago my father had thrown down legal papers like they were salt and pepper shakers. Now it held coffee mugs, notebooks, and a 3-ring binder titled Adult Learning, Spring Cohort. Elijah sipped tea slowly, his foot tapping a soft rhythm against the floor. I think we call the curriculum Winna's words, he said. Use her stories as phonetic examples. It's personal, human. I nodded. She'd like that. She always believed everyone deserved a fair shot at reading, at telling their own story. Later, after Elijah left, I walked to the small family plot where we'd placed Mom's headstone. I didn't bring flowers, just the first lemon from the tree tucked into a handkerchief. I placed it gently beside the stone, beside the word beloved carved above her name. I sat a while. A breeze rolled through the pines. Somewhere down the hill, a car door slammed. The wind shifted, bringing the faint scent of lemon soil and the honeysuckle bush I'd finally trimmed back. The air felt easier now. That evening after dinner, I checked my email for the first time in 2 days. A new message blinked from Joella. You were right. Thank you for doing what I couldn't. I stared at the screen, read it twice, then clicked it closed without reply. Some bridges didn't need crossing again. It was enough they still stood. Before bed, I stepped onto the back porch holding the cracked teacup I'd glued last winter. Its seam still showed, but it held water just fine. I set the cup beside the lemon on the windowsill. Turns out some things do grow back, just slower and sweeter. The light caught just right on the cracked teacup this morning, glued months ago, but holding strong beside the lemon I'd picked in spring. Funny how the smallest things outlive the noise. Turns out justice isn't always about courts or signatures. Sometimes it's just planting something honest and letting it grow without apology. We don't always get to rewrite what's gone, but we can still choose what comes next. And maybe, just maybe, forgiveness starts with setting down the weight before it turns us bitter. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? I'd love to hear what it looked like.